Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. My name is Julie Tai, and I'm president of the New York League of Conservation Voters and New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. We're happy to be joined by Senator Gustavo Rivera, Assembly Member Richard Gottfried, the American Academy of Pediatrics, Healthy Schools Network, We Act for Environmental Justice, and Natural Resources Defense Council. Lead is a hazardous chemical that continues to pose a dangerous risk to children. Exposure to it can cause irreparable neurological and behavioral health consequences, especially for developing bodies. That's why we've been working on reducing lead poisoning for years, from paint, dust, and drinking water. Today, we're unveiling our newest report, 5 is the New 15, calling for the legislature and governor to strengthen the 2016 testing program for lead in public school drinking water. This report is dedicated to the memory of our colleague, Cecil Corbin Mark of We Act for Environmental Justice. As many of you know, Cecil was a general in the war against lead poisoning, and we are proud to keep up the fight in his honor. In 2016, New York led the nation by adopting the toughest testing mandate for lead in public school drinking water. School districts were required to immediately remediate fountains and faucets with lead at levels greater than 15 parts per billion. Since that law passed, recognition has been growing among public health advocates that the EPA's action level of 15 parts per billion is outdated and that a lower level should be set. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that lead concentrations in school drinking water be less than 1 part per billion. When comparing the EPA standard to the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendation, there is clearly room for improvement. That is why we're asking New York State to lead the nation again by joining Montana, Illinois, Vermont, and Washington, D.C. in strengthening the current law, the Safe Schools Drinking Act. We're calling on the state to reduce the lead action level from 15 parts per billion to 5 parts per billion. New York would be the largest state in the nation to codify this goal. Reducing the action level to 5 parts per billion is in alignment with the Food and Drug Administration's criteria for what is acceptable in bottled water. In developing our report, we analyzed lab reports from school districts across the state. Following the adoption of the Safe Schools Drinking Act in 2016, nearly 48,000 outlets exceeded the standard, or roughly 12%. Our analysis found that an additional 63,000 drinking water outlets that are currently in use, or 17.2%, would need to be remediated under a more protective standard of 5 parts per billion. We also performed an economic analysis, which estimates that it would cost the state $30 million to remediate all 63,000 outlets. Given that the state already spent approximately $28 million in the 2016 round of testing to remediate nearly 38,000 outlets, this represents a great return on investment, both in terms of dollars and health benefits. Finally, we visualized where all these outlets were located by region, county, state senate and assembly district, school district, and down to the school building. I want to thank our Senior Vice President, Josh Kleinberg, and the army of volunteers who undertook the research and analysis necessary to put this report together. Lowering the lead standard for school drinking water from 15 to 5 parts per billion is one of our top priorities in 2021. And we're committed to working with Governor Cuomo, Senator Rivera, Assemblymember Gottfried, our partners, and all our elected officials to make significant improvements to our drinking water for our children. We are grateful that Senator Rivera and Assemblyman Gottfried recently submitted legislation to update our lead standards. And so now I would like to welcome Senator Gustavo Rivera.
Thank you, Julie. It's good to see you. I'm looking forward to the moment that we will be able to do this in person again. Hopefully that's closer rather than farther. But I'm happy to be here with you folks in the New York League of Conservation Voters. And this report today kind of just tells us the facts that although we have done a lot in the state to deal with the harmful effects of lead poisoning, especially in our the fight to do it, especially in our schools, is actually far from over. And that's why I'm very proud to be sponsored here with my sponsor, with my colleague in the Assembly. And we do a lot of work together. So this is just be one more thing that we're battling together, and that is to sponsor the bill on the Senate side, Bill 2122, that would make several improvements to the existing program. Now it would reduce, as Julie was just saying, reduce the action level from 15 parts per billion to 5 parts per billion. We should be leading in the state. A lot of folks say consistently that we're supposed to be leaders in the state. I believe we should. We will be following a couple of other states, but okay. It's a good group to be a part of, so I want to be a part of that. It would require annual rather than periodic testing. It would remove the waivers and exemptions for certain schools that currently exist. It requires lab reports to be posted online so they're publicly available to folks. And it would require training for school personnel or contractors that are involved in that testing. And ultimately, what it would do is ensure that drinking water in schools is safe and free of lead and free of this contamination. And just we want to set higher standards and higher remediation standards. So we are. This is a brand new year, and I'm looking forward to working along with the New York League of Conservation Voters, as well as my colleagues and obviously my colleague in the Assembly, on getting this passed. And we'll be doing that work in the next couple of weeks and months. Looking forward to working with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator. And next we will hear from Assemblymember Richard Gottfried.
Well, thank you. Every time this topic comes up, I think back, it's just in my experience, well back into the late 60s that I first became aware of lead as an issue. In those days, the focus was on paint chips that children were picking up and swallowing. And then we started to focus on water. It's just stunning that after all these decades, we're still trying to get it right. And, part of that is the science keeps telling us more, but we've got to keep up with the science. That's what New York says we're proud to do. And the science tells us that we've got to get the lead level in water, particularly school drinking water, down below 0.005 milligrams, is it, per liter. The health of our children is at stake. Their mental development is at stake. We look across the country at what is going on in Flint, Michigan, and we're all horrified that a community would do that to itself and its children. I don't think we're doing Flint, Michigan at this point in New York, but unless we are doing the absolute best that science enables us to do by our children, we are failing them. And that's something we always say we would never want to do. And the cost of saving the lives in future and the well-being of so many of our young people, compared with what's at stake, is negligible. And we've got to get this done. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Assemblyman, and to both of you for putting in this bill and for your leadership over the years on these issues. We could not have put this report together without our partners. So please join us. And joining us today is from the Academy of Pediatrics, is Ellie Ward.
Hi. I will start my conversation with saying there is no safe level of lead for children. There just isn't. So if we're going from 15 to 5, that's progress. If we go from 5 to 1 in another year or two, that would be even better progress. We talk a great deal about why we want to create healthy environments for our kids. School is where, except for COVID, kids spend a great deal of time. We've worked hard with many of the other partners in this press conference today to get chemicals out of schools, to get safe cleaning chemicals in schools, to get toxins out of school furniture and rugs and building materials. This is not the last frontier, but it's work that has to be done, and it has to be done now. There is no safe level of lead. That's what we believe. Lead is a toxin. Toxin means it's a poison. And the way it works on kids is it interferes with their development, both of their brain and their physical development. And the sequelae, or the consequences of being poisoned by lead, are very, very difficult to address and often irreversible. So if we think that we're sending our kids into a safe environment or a safer environment, until we get lead out of school buildings and recognize that many, many school buildings are old, they're not the newest construction. So the work, the remediation that needs to be done is significant, but it's cost effective, and it's incredibly important in order to have a group of children coming up that at least don't have to face toxins in their own school environment. So we say, let's pass the bill. There are ways to fund it. It's economically, as well as from a human point of view, an important thing to do. And again, if New York wants to be a leader, let us lead. Let us stop talking about how we lead and simply be followers. Let's take this and do it, and let's do it now. That's from 6,000 pediatricians across New York State. Let's get lead out of the schools now.
That's right. It's time to get the lead out. It's not just an intro for Led Zeppelin hour. Thank you, Ellie. Now please welcome Claire Barnett and Alex Nadeau from the Healthy Schools Network.
Thank you, Julie, and thanks so much to LCV for this terrific report, and particularly to Senator Rivera and Assemblyman Gottfried for introducing the bill. We're really excited about this. As we all know, the poorest schools tend to have the poorest children and the most lead and the most other kinds of difficulties. When we looked at this bill and looked at the 2016 law, we were particularly struck by something we didn't expect to find. And that is, in 2016, it would allow in New York State schools that had quote unquote EPA labeled lead-free fixtures to identify the schools as a lead-free school. We thought that was a little bit too far. There are plenty of sources of lead in school. We led a 2017 workshop down in Washington, DC with 55 national partners and found all kinds of levels of lead in all kinds of products, typically around schools. And lead in drinking water is one that we can deal with and one that we can solve now. EPA allows some lead in its fixtures, but it's time now to not allow schools to identify themselves as lead-free and not to let that be used as an exemption for doing any more testing. I want to turn it over to Alex, a comment in terms of the poorest schools and what we found. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to say it's an honor to be here with everybody and to thank everyone for their hard work. The only thing I want to add is we did a report early on, and one of our findings was that early research suggests that the poorest schools have the most taps closed due to lead, and that we need more information on how the poorest schools are getting reimbursed and how to best provide free clean water.
Great.
I would close just mentioning that was actually a question that Cecil asked early on in 2016 and 2017. Where is the reimbursement going? Are the poorest schools serving the poorest children getting the money they need to deal with the problem? Thanks.
Thank you to Claire and Alex. Next, we have Sonal Jessel from We Act for Environmental Justice.
Julie, so first, thank you, NYLC, for your tribute. We Act thanks you for that, for our late wonderful leader, Cecil Corbin Mark. So we thank Senator Rivera, Assemblymember Gottfried, and everyone here today for calling on the amendment for the New York State Public Health Law to tighten lead action level for lead contamination in drinking water for public schools to 5 parts per billion. It's will close key loopholes and improve training, transparency, frequency of testing. For decades, We Act for Environmental Justice has been fighting against toxic pollutants, which disproportionately impact our low-income communities, our communities of color, even as Claire just mentioned. And lead poisoning is amongst one of the most egregious threats that's 100% preventable. Children are the most vulnerable to the harmful effects of lead. It impairs development of their brain, nervous system, and leads to permanent, profound health issues that last through the lifespan. And according to a 2020 study and many studies before that and will follow after, Black or African-American children in the United States are around 3 times more likely to have highly elevated blood lead levels. So we have fought and passed for legislation such as Local Law 1 in New York City, but so far we're still seeing too much lead poisoning for our children in New York. So we're here today issuing this, really excited to see this new report that's aiming to reduce lead levels in drinking water in the public schools. And, we send our children to school to learn, not put them at risk of neurobehavioral developmental issues. Taking a drink from a water fountain between classes should refuel their bodies, not poison them. We will continue to fight and eradicate this threat to our children, to eliminate every source of lead exposure and their cumulative effects. And we're excited to move forward with this law.
Great. Thank you so much, Sonal. And lastly, please welcome Joan Matthews from the Natural Resources Defense Council.
Hi, everybody. Very happy to be part of this event. And thank you to Senator Rivera and Assemblyman Gottfried for your leadership on these bills. It will go a long way to protect children's health when they are in schools. Parents deserve to send their children to schools that have safe drinking water free of poisonous lead. We want kids to drink water. We just don't want that water to be full of lead. New York State in 2016 was the first in the nation to create a mandatory testing, taking action, and telling law. But since then, some other states have eclipsed New York State in testing for lead in drinking water in schools. And so what this bill does is to implement much needed protections to New York's current program, especially to reduce the action level to 5 parts per billion. We absolutely know what the problem is, and we know how to fix it. It's cost effective. Our children deserve to be protected, and these bills would do just that. And thank you also to LCV for this wonderful report. It's really going to help us go a long way in achieving this goal. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to